Hello everyone, welcome to the What If Anime YouTube channel. Today, we are diving into an exciting new story that will take your imagination to the next level.
It's part 2 of What If Naruto was the silent genius in the Chunin exams? Let's continue the story.
He was laying on the highest branch of a tall tree, staring up at the stars that began to come into view as a full moon rose from the east. His arms were crossed behind his head and he star-gazed in silence, a heavy feeling setting into his chest as he stood up and leapt from the branch into the next, landing with barely a noise as he pulled open the curtain of leaves that had been draped over the entrance to his new home. Slipping inside, he peeled off his shirt and put it against the tree where he leaned back against it. The bark jutting out still hurt his back, but it was better than having his skin scraped off by the rough tree. He didn't know when he fell asleep. He didn't know when the nightmares came. The numerous beatings he endured came to haunt him amidst his rest and usually jolted him awake earlier than he should have been. Tonight he slept through and relived almost every beating he had taken in just 9 hours. When he awoke, he had a thin layer of sweat of his torso and his stomach rumbled loudly. He grabbed a branch just a few feet overhead and used it to pull the rest of his aching body up. Despite having used this method to sleep before, his back still felt like it had been put through a meat tenderizer when he woke up. He ducked out of his shelter and walked to the end of the branch, stretching with his arms up in the air. The satisfying crack came quickly as he began to straighten out the rest of his body, his legs cracking slightly along with his elbows. Finally relieved, he looked over the clearing that would be his training ground for the next year. When he bent his knees and hopped off the branch in a very much practiced routine, his hand was already up and he caught the branch that was further down from his shelter, stopping his fall and bending just enough to put his feet gently on the ground. He let go of the branch and it flung itself back up to its previous spot. Some of the leaves shook loose and came down around him as he walked towards his food storage. Seeing the pitiful amount of food he made a frown and shook his head to himself, while grabbing his kunai and going out to hunt. He stepped softly, examining the ground in front of him and taking in all the entities that could make noise. A twig 5 feet to the right, 2 feet long, very brittle looking. He mentally noted while his eyes went back to searching for prey. Stepping over the twig mentioned, it was finally seen. Prey, rabbit, male, appears to be 5 years of age. He stalks forward, remembering to take glances at the ground to avoid making noise. Once he was in a range, he was sure he could hit the animal. He went through the motion once, making sure his body was fully awake. Finding no problems, he went for the kill. The kunai hit the rabbit in the side of the head and it fell without a noise, foot still twitching as if it was trying to get away. Back in camp with 3 rabbits slung over his shoulder, he sat on a rock near the tree line and slipped a knife out from his pocket. After scanning over it briefly, remembering how much he had to pay to get the merchant to give it to him, he shook his head with a laugh. It was worth it. He began to skin the rabbits carefully as he was trying to conserve their pelts to sell the next time the merchant, whom he had become friends with, passed by. After 7 hours there was 3 beheaded rabbits hung upside down over a fire. The pelts were laying in the shade and decently tanned, enough to get around 100 ryo each. He mused as his gaze traveled over his handiwork, then to the sun. The sun had just barely crossed overhead and was now setting, let's say 2 p.m. With a sigh he went back to the food, and picked up the stick embedded in the ground, hastily pulling his meal back to him. He pulled the knife hastily from his pocket and sliced a piece of meat from the meal, popping the morsel in his mouth curiously, as if in wonder if the food was all right. Recognizing the meat was cooked thoroughly, a small smile and a proud nod came from him as he continued to enjoy his meal in this fashion. The day continued along, time lost to him while he had gotten water, a bit more food, and he had pulled out the book that had been written by the Sanin. Tale of the Utterly Gutsy Shinobi. The words fell out of his mouth, voice just above a whisper as his thumb unconsciously traced over the simple title of the book as he spoke. Carefully, he peeled the first page of the book, which, judging by the condition, hadn't been read very often. It looked almost brand new but had an air of age around it at the same time. Shaking his head free of his own thoughts, his eyes snapped to the first paragraph, first line, and first word of a book that would undoubtedly change his views on life for years to come. The sun had finally begun to set behind the treetops. After climbing to the top of his tree, he sat comfortably on his favorite branch, and could just barely see the sun disappear under the horizon. A wide variety of colors painted the sky as it grew darker. Pinks and purples, oranges and reds. A shade of green somewhere mixed in. A content sigh escaped his mouth as he leaned back further into the tree and let a small, real, smile grace his lips. His breathing had slowed, and he drifted into a dreamless sleep. The boy known as Naruto lived like this for the full year and a half until his 9th birthday. October 9th, so I'm 9 tomorrow, He asked no one in particular, crouching down on the edge of the branch while balancing on the balls of his feet. His gaze traveled out over the forest to the village of Konoha. A soft look settled on his features and he stood, stretching to his full height of about 4 foot. Satisfied with how his muscles were now stretched, he bent his knees and jumped, laughing as he twisted in the air to do a flip, and landed perfectly in the same crouching position he was in while sitting on the branch. Don't want to make the old man walk all the way out here, I suppose. The figure mumbled quietly to himself as he stood up once more and slung a leather pack over his shoulder. With one nostalgic glance over the clearing, he turned towards his home and set off with a burst of speed as he disappeared into the tree branches, leaving nothing but what looks like a quaint, out-of-the-way clearing. Traveling through the trees at a swift pace, he figured he would arrive at the gate within the hour, and a hand moved to the back of his neck as he pulled an orange hood up over his head, which strangely seemed to match with his black and green Konoha clothing. A vicious smile came across his lips as he slipped his hand into his pack and came out with a kitsune mask. The mask came over his face and he locked it in place with some chakra directed to the area. What's a good way to show those villagers that I'm back? Something big, that is for sure. His mind began to drift as he thought of good pranks to signify his return. He gasped as the idea came to him, and he continued the rest of the way to the gate with a shit-eating grin under his mask. After 20 minutes of leaping from tree to tree, the gate came into view. Along with the 2 gatekeepers. Crap, what were their names? Imozu and Tokutsu. No. He gave a bow as he came to the gate. Katetsu, Izumi, it's good to say, but wahaha. Damn it, Katetsu, this is serious. Izumo's hand was balled into a fist and a throbbing tick mark had appeared above his head as he yelled at his partner, Katetsu, who was now rolling on the ground with tears coming out of the corner of his eyes. Izumo turned to him. Ninja registration, please, sir. And it's Izumo. There is no I, that's a girl's name. He spoke venomously, while glaring daggers at him while his partner calmed himself. He responded nearly instantly. You see, that's a problem for me. I don't necessarily have, a registration, so to speak. Everything had suddenly become serious, and he really didn't want to get in a fight, especially with some people who seemed like pretty nice guys. Not to mention they would have to be pretty strong if they were trusted to guard the gate. So he quickly went to explain himself. But I can report to the Hokage and have his backing. I have just been on a, mission. Yeah, a mission. He stumbled and they had both narrowed their eyes at him. You seem pretty young to be going on missions. Yay, and what's with the suspicious get-up? He inwardly groaned. Maybe he should have just let the old man come and get him. Listen, just let me pass, and I can bring the Hokage himself here to prove it to you. They tensed and he began to slide into a defense position until a black shadow appeared next to him. Anbu, Kitsune, what has been holding you up here? The man in the cat mask asked while the 2 gatekeepers before him nearly jumped out of their skin. He merely jerked his head in their direction and they hastily moved out of his way. Sorry Anbu-san. We had not known that he was one of yours. He nods his thanks to the Anbu as the man disappeared in a shunshin, and walked through the gate towards the Hokage Tower, walking right through the middle of the street, watching the villagers in his peripheral village while another shit-eating grin sprouted across his face as he saw their wonderment at seeing what they thought was an Anbu just walking around in broad daylight. A short time of inwardly laughing later and he had arrived at the gates, and another 2 gatekeepers. A deep breath calmed him down somewhat and he looked up at the window to what he knew was the Hokage's office. Glaring, he noticed it was conveniently open and, even while knowing the possible consequences, appeared at the window with the shunshin, only to be staring at what was unmistakably a meeting for the Jonin of the village, -1 Kakashi Hitaki. His eyes narrowed as the hidden Anbu in the room seemed to be making signals to each other with an unrecognizable method. The Jonin had visibly relaxed to his presence, assuming him to be an Anbu reporting to the Hokage. Hiruzen had raised an eyebrow at him suspiciously, and narrowed his eyes. Stepping down from the window and leaning back against it, He did the only thing he could think of to break the ice. As his hand moved toward his pocket, the Anbu made a move as if they were going to attack, which caused Hiruzen to raise his hand and call him off. Everyone tensed as he pulled the item from its storage, a copy of Icha Icha Paradise. After reading over a couple of pages, he looked up to see everyone picking themselves up from their face faults. Even Hiruzen had to hold the desk to stop himself. A groan by a tan, raven-haired man with a scraggly beard broke the few minutes' silence. It's another one. Silence. Everyone out. The use of Hiruzen's Hokage voice came quick and venomous. Needless to say, everyone had filed out after that. The Anbu themselves had even left after hearing the voice and recognizing it as a command to them as well. The dark gaze of the Hokage swept over to him and the man rose from his chair slowly, moving towards him at an ominous pace which made him wince. In a quick second, he had been wrapped up in a tight hug, which he had returned after overcoming his shock. His Icha Icha book had been torn from his grip, and hidden so quickly he didn't even see when it had happened. Naruto. The man's voice was soft. I'm so glad. He closed his eyes and squeezed tighter. That you didn't make an old man like me walk through the forest to reach you. A deadpan overcame his hidden face and his eye twitched as the Hokage moved back to his chair. Naruto, 10 years old, propping his feet up on the table. Naruto leaned back in the chair so that it was balancing on the back 2 legs. Dozing like this had become a habit of his during class, and he was usually reprimanded harshly by the sensei, Iruka, when he did so. Naruto, speak of the devil and he shall appear. He mumbled under his breath as a chorus of laughter broke out in the class. Letting the chair fall back forward with a loud bang, which silenced the whole class, he pulled his feet off the desk and grinned at Iruka sheepishly while scratching his cheek. Yay, Iruka-sensei, when did I tell you about sleeping in class? Iruka glared with a raised eyebrow. Grin turning into a frown, Naruto pointed at the Nara next to him, who had laid his head back in his crossed arms and was presumably sleeping. Well, what are you gonna do about him? He asks, a tone of exasperation coming into his voice. I've given up on trying to wake him a long time ago. The man answers, shaking his head grievously. Mouth gaping, he stares at the teacher, before letting his face drop back onto the desk, causing another chorus of laughter. Well, since everyone seems to find class so funny, how about we take a quiz? Iruka shouted to all the students behind him, before pulling the stack of papers from some kind of hidden compartment in his clothes, and putting enough to pass down his row in front of him. Basically everyone in the class turned to glare at him, and some had even groaned his official nickname, Dobie. With a shrug he took the sheet and placed it carefully on the Nara's head, balancing it carefully there before he took a pencil from his pocket and looked over the quiz. Marking every single answer except the last one wrong, he stood and walked up to the desk where an Iruka with an odd expression was awaiting him. Done already, Naruto? Yup, and this is a 100%, believe it. He exclaimed before slamming the poor piece of paper down on the desk, drawing some snickers from the rows of his classmates. Shaking his head, Iruka took the paper and looked over it for less than a second before looking back up to Naruto. There's only one question right on this paper. What? No way. That's only a 7%. He shouted, causing the whole class to burst out into laughter. Iruka shook his head once more, his eyes closed, almost as if he was mourning. Sit down, Dobie, before you embarrass yourself even more. One person's voice came above all the others, quieting the class. Sasuke Uchiha, turning to glare at the boy, and was about to open his mouth to say something but with a bit of his real personality coming through, went to sit down instead, sighing the whole way. Instead of the arrogant smirk he had been expecting from the Uchiha, a frown was on his face instead. Leaning back in his chair once more he dozed off, his head lolling to the side in an uncomfortable way. Alright class, outside for sparring. Stretching his arms and yawning tiredly, he rubbed his eyes and opened them to see everyone filing out of the classroom except for the Nara who had shaken him awake. Setting the front legs of the chair down gently, he stood a bit too quickly and nearly fell when his world turned sideways. Troublesome, he heard Shikamaru mutter and blink rapidly, trying to force his world to steady itself. Here, put your hand here. He just barely heard and looked at the other boy quizzically, trying to gauge if he could trust him. Just about to fall, he put his arm around the Nara's neck with his hand gripping the boy's shoulder. Shikamaru's arm went under his and rested on his shoulder, supporting him carefully. A gentle smile went across his lips and he let himself be led out of the class and to the academy's training grounds. Sorry if confusing, just a little hard to explain. Kinda like this. As they came out from the building, they were met with various expressions. Most of the class laughed, while Ruka had a worried expression. Look at those two, you think they're gay? He could practically feel Shikamaru roll his eyes and laughed a little as they just walked past the class into the tree line, where he was led down. Leaning back against the tree, he uttered a soft, "Thank you," before pulling out his favorite book. Icha Icha Paradise. He felt the other boy sit next to him, and also felt the confused stare, but the boy didn't say anything, which he was particularly grateful for. "So, we're both wearing a mask, huh?" he asked while reading, not bothering to look away. "Yay," was the simple reply. He could definitely trust him. "Friends?" he asked quietly, a frown hidden behind the book, as he was slightly worried about the reply. "Friends." Closing his eyes, he snapped the book shut as both his and his new friend's names were called for sparring. "Forfeit," he yelled over to Aruka, earning another shaking of the man's head, but he could still see the small smile hidden in the shadow of the man's face. With that, he turned and smirked at the Nara, which was returned. "Shogi," they both said at the same time, and stood quickly, with Shikamaru dusting off his pants and Naruto slipping his book back into his orange jumpsuit's pocket while tugging at the collar, almost praying for the thing to burst into flames right then and there. He liked the color orange, but the thing was more for his own personal training purposes than the color, which there was a bit too much of. "Damn," he spoke while laying atop the Yondaime, his father's head. "You really are a genius, Shikamaru." He laughed, his arms crossed behind his head, while the other boy lay a few feet behind him, on the dirt while watching the clouds. A orange hue taking over the sky as it slowly darkened. "Three games, with each being 2 hours long, and you beat me out by a mile in all 3 of them." He stopped, glancing up to make sure the other boy was not sleeping or something like that. Seeing open eyes, he went back to watching the sunset while waiting for an answer. "Well, look at it this way, Naruto. You're the first one to ever push me that far. Considering the only one to ever beat me is my father, you are an amazing player and strategist. I knew when you first revealed your true personality that you were smart, but I never expected something like that. You know, if you keep talking like that, I might to start agree with our classmates' view of you being gay." He glanced up again, receiving an amused glare from the other boy, a smirk on his face. "They meant both of us, at the time." He retorted, "Well, I know that, but I know for a fact that I'm not gay." "So let's hear it, Nara. I didn't hear you not say that you were gay." This time, the lazy tone came back to the boy's voice. "Nah, I'm not gay. I blame my lack on interest of girls on half of them being stupid, fawning over the Uchiha, and my own body not kicking into puberty just yet." A glance up at the sky, and while sitting up he continued. "Listen, Naruto, it's been fun, but I don't need to be yelled at by my dad for being out so late. I'll see you tomorrow. I also have someone I would like you to meet. You know him, Choji. He's one of my best friends." Feigning hurt, Naruto sat up and held his hand over his heart. "I'm not your best friends, Shikamaru?" Rolling his eyes, Shikamaru turns away, waving his hand before jogging away. "CYA," he calls as the other boy leaves, before laying back down and closing his eyes, slowly drifting into sleep with a smile on his face. He made a friend today. Naruto, 12 years old, graduation day. Walking towards the academy was Naruto Uzumaki, his face buried in an adult book, orange jumpsuit discarded for his orange hooded cloak with a loose-fitting black sweatshirt underneath. Brown cargo shorts came down just below his knee, barely revealing his defined calves. Glancing up as he reached the academy gate, he walks into the building. Snapping the book shut and smiling as he walked straight up the side of the building and crouching on the windowsill, effectively scaring the class. All except Shikamaru, Choji, and Aruka, who only seemed to be surprised. His 3 friends in the whole class. Choji, whom he was introduced to by Shikamaru and was actually quite a fun person once you got to know him. Aruka, who approached him one night with genuine concern. When asked if he was being bullied by his classmates, he had laughed, cracking his mask and raising Aruka's suspicion towards him. The man practically stalked him for a whole year until he got sick of it and let Aruka see his real personality. Smiling gently, he stepped down and walked past Aruka, who glared at him, and went over by Choji and Shikamaru, who he now sat between. Naruto, did you know that you were 2.5 hours late? Iruka reprimanded him, to which he waved his hand casually. Ah, you see Iruka's sense. There was this kitten on the side of the road in a little box, so I had to bring it home and nurture it back to health. Iruka just stared at him with a strange look on his face. Horror? Another question for later. Besides, 2.5 hours? That's actually pretty early for me, you know. Facepalming, Iruka just pointed to his seat, and so he sat down. Everyone else in the class was slightly perturbed by his change of personality and new clothes, and were glancing at him curiously as he waited patiently for the test to be passed around. Furrowing his eyebrows as Iruka's assistant walked in, Mizuki, he sat and thought of what would be a good word to what he sensed emanating from the man. Trickery? No. Manipulation? Close. Deceit? Came the mumble from deep within his mind as the Kyuubi threw in his own 2 cents. Tapping his chin thoughtfully, he nodded in acceptance. Yay, that's the word. Thanks. Naruto eyed the man carefully, and looked down at his paper, which as he had always done, marked only the very last answer right. Standing and glancing down to Shikamaru's paper, he rolled his eyes after seeing every answer marked right. Looks like he wanted to pass this test. Naruto himself couldn't be bothered to look through all the questions, although he was sure he could get a 100%. He planned to pass in the other 2 categories, preferably just barely passing at that. Iruka gazed at him carefully as he put his paper down on the man's desk. With a small smile, he makes his way back to his seat, glancing around the room for signs of anything out of the ordinary. Sitting down just as Shikamaru stands to go turn in his own paper, he leans back to tilt his chair and slowly dozes off. Alright everyone, out to the training grounds for your throwing test, and after that we will return in here for your ninjutsu test. Blinking his eyes open, he stands slowly and follows Shikamaru out. Arriving at the training ground, which was set up with various targets, he looks at Iruka and walks over, drawing a raised eyebrow from the man. Without a word, he snatches the kunai and shuriken, holding 10 of each in both hands. Snapping into his self-trained stance out of instinct, he forces himself into his usual lazy manner and half-heartedly swings his arms, releasing the weapons each at the perfect time and at an awkward angle, which is into the sky. Iruka looked like he was about to say something until they arced slowly, 7 of both weapons coming down to indent themselves into the wooden targets. Most of the class was laughing while he returned to his spot next to Shikamaru, who had Choji on his other side. Pass, Iruka said bluntly, all the while staring at Naruto, who returns his stare with a mischievous glint in his eye. Next, Iruka called, turning away to hide a small smile on his face. Staying quiet the whole time, he followed the class inside as they went off to finish the last part of the test. Feeling a pat on the back, he whipped his head to see Mizuki smiling at him with closed eyes. Good luck, the man said gently, and he had to restrain the urge to beat the man's teeth down his throat right then and there. Thank, he yelled, crossing his arms behind his head with a cheeky grin plastered on his face, while his friends stared at Mizuki distrustfully, as they learned that people that made him revert back to his stupid personality were usually bad news. Going inside, he instantly turned to Shikamaru and Choji as they gathered in the corner of the room. Mizuki's bad news. He fucked up my chakra control, so I can't make any clones or transform. Is what he thinks. Even with whatever he did to me, I can still do those specific jutsu. Even so, I'm gonna purposely fail the test to see what he wants. I figure he has deeper intentions than just making me fail. He spoke quickly and in a hushed tone. A smile came across his face as they nod, but he instantly turned serious again. Don't hang out with me until I approach you. I don't want you guys to be dragged into this. His voice became soft, and they nod again, although a bit more hesitant this time. Naruto. Turning away, he glances one more time over his shoulder at his friends, before walking down towards the door to the room where his career as a ninja may end. Inside, both Iruka and Mizuki stare at him. Create 3 Bunshin. Following instructions, he went through the various hand signs and forced his chakra to waver, effectively messing them up. Looking at the 3 clones that appeared slumped and dead next to him, he felt relief and at the same time a twinge of regret. Naruto. Got you. Fail. Iruka said, seeming to force the words out. Feigning shock, he spoke quickly. What, no way. I'm telling you I could do it just yesterday. Please Iruka-sensei, let me pass. He begged, while forcing himself to sound exasperated. We could let him pass, Iruka. Mizuki asked, and he narrowed his eyes, faltering for just a second. I have to see what he's planning. No, we have to fail him, Iruka said, his voice hardening, probably still trying to recover from the shock that he failed. Too shocked to notice Mizuki's unusual behavior. Sitting on the swing after class, he sat solemnly while watching the other kids get proud congratulations from their parents. What would his life be like if his parents survived? Wincing involuntarily, he barely noticed when Mizuki walked up next to him. Naruto. He jumped and looked over at Mizuki, faking his surprise to see him. What you doing, Mizuki-sensei? He asked, unable to keep the sorrow out of his voice. At least it would make it more believable. There's another way to graduate, you know. The man spoke softly. What? How? He jumped up and looked at the man, his thoughts going over what Mizuki could want him to do. You have to go on a fake mission to steal a scroll kept in the Hokage Tower. After learning one jutsu from this scroll, you will pass. Do you think you could do this? Nodding his head slowly, Naruto almost laughed out loud at how stupid this man thought him to be. Take out the word fake, and he was basically being asked to commit treason. Stealing the scroll had been easy enough, and that was how he got here, sitting on the ground, reading over the scroll as he waited for Mizuki to come try to take it, which is when he planned to apprehend him. Mulling over the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, which he thought was actually a pretty cool technique, he figured learning it couldn't hurt, and went through the seals once, jumping back a bit surprised when a solid copy of himself appeared. It had taken him a few weeks to learn the normal Bunshin, and get his chakra control good enough to use it, while this only took first try. Shaking his head, he looked up to see an open-mouthed Iruka staring at him, which quickly turned into an angry-faced Iruka, stomping towards him. Naruto, what in the hell do you think you're doing? He yelled at him, and before he could open his mouth to explain, Mizuki appeared a few feet to the left. Good job, Naruto, you followed my orders perfectly, you graduated. Now hand over the scroll, he said, a smile on his face the whole time. No, Mizuki's face contorted into anger and he pulled a large shuriken from his back. He moved to dodge, knowing he could easily avoid the weapon, but before he could, Iruka appeared in front of him and took the hit. His mouth fell open and he stared in silence as blood drizzled from Iruka's mouth and dripped to the ground. Run, Naruto. Don't listen to him. His jaw slowly closed and he gritted his teeth. One of his precious people hurt. Because of him and his stupidity. Now give me that scroll, you little demon. Mizuki snarled, throwing another large shuriken at Iruka's back. He felt the bubbling rage pour into his body and he moved quickly, dashing behind Iruka, to which the man weakly protested. Naruto's eyes hidden by the shadows of his orange hood, which faintly flapped as the wind blew gently. The shuriken flew at a speed which was agonizingly slow to him, and he felt his body quivering with bottled rage as he brought his hand up, catching the shuriken and sending his rage through his arm, which caused the weapon in his hand to crack before shattering from where he was holding onto it. He could hear his rapid heartbeat in his ears and could just barely hear the white-haired man before him ranting. The only words he managed to pick out were, sealed, and Kyuubi. The Kyuubi? I've known about him for a long time. Mizuki-sensei. He growled out, the breeze picking up into a gale, which blew his hood off. I'll show you a real demon, Mizuki. He snarled as he rushed forward, a seemingly red aura erupting from his body and cloaking him quickly as he flexed the new claws on his fingers. It was at this point he blacked out. He awoke to the feeling of a hand on his shoulder, and he stopped his arm which was in the middle of swinging downwards. His head snapped to the side and he instantly relaxed upon seeing the soft gaze of Iruka. Oh, Iruka-sensei, where'd Mizuki go? He asked as the night's events came to him. And are you okay? He asked a little urgently, ignoring the warm, moist feeling on his fists. At the saddened gaze of Iruka, he suddenly felt a little sick and looked down to see what he was beating on. Upon seeing the mushy head of what was presumably a person, with his knees pinning whoever it was arms, not allowing them to block his beating. Then he saw the white hair splayed out behind what looked like a watermelon that had been smashed out with a sledgehammer, and he stood up quickly, running off to some bushes while holding his mouth. He emptied the contents of his stomach, and continued to dry heave until long after the squad of Enbu showed up. When Hiruzen showed up not long after, he forced himself to stop, and turned to see that the mess had been cleaned up. All except his clothes, which the whole front of them were now dyed an orange-red color. He once again passed. The last thing of his fading consciousness that he could feel was arms wrapping around him and stopping his fall. Iruka and Naruto were sat at the Ichiraku stand, both with a bowl of ramen in front of them, with Iruka sipping up the noodles slowly, peering at Naruto out of the corner of his eyes. Naruto just sat blankly while staring down into the bowl. Lifting the bowl to his mouth and tilting it back, sipping down all the juice, Iruka slammed it back down on the table, causing Naruto's head to slowly turn to him. "Damn it, Naruto, you did what you had to," Iruka finally shouted, which were the first words spoken since Naruto had woken up. The moon at its highest point in the sky, around 1 to 2 a.m. Naruto was just staring blankly, while, unbeknownst to Iruka, he was having an inner battle of emotions. Seeming to decide on the right words, he turned to stare once again at the bowl of ramen before him, nearly losing the small amount he had eaten when an image of Mizuki's crushed head passed through his mind.
Like and subscribe for next part.